I want to clarify that this podcast is distinct from my responsibilities as a professor in the Sam M. Walton College of Business. Nonetheless, it aligns with my aspiration to provide practical insights to professionals and business by showcasing companies and people that can enhance your ability to manage, lead, and strategize and market effectively in the retail value chain. And now, without further ado, let's get into the exciting episode. I have with me today Sam Tibbs, who is the co-founder, CEO, and CPO of Trokai Data Corp. He has a PhD in finance from the University of Tennessee. He also has a CFA, which is very challenging to get. He has an undergraduate degree in nuclear engineering technology. And he has a lot of experience in transportation and logistics, but he also has lots of experience and knowledge of early stage companies and technology companies in general. But welcome, Sam. Thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me. And some of your references take me way back to, I guess I'm showing my age some, but back to my Navy dating when I was in the Navy nuclear power program. So, but yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I look forward to chatting, and thanks for your time in advance.
So before we talk about Trokai, would you tell me a little bit about how did you get involved in trucking and logistics, especially since, you came from nuclear technology to a PhD in finance, a CFA. I'm sure that helps you in business in general, but how did you make that transition?
All right, great question. So I'll start and say, as a fellow academic, I've taught lots of classes, and I'm sure you can relate that students would be very uncertain what their major was. And I had to remind them, you don't know for a while, and I can joke, I worked at a skating ring, an aircraft carrier, coffee shop. I taught, and then I came, into trucking. So the transition to trucking wasn't what I was expecting. It was a kind of a forced thing, in that I had to move back to the Chattanooga, Tennessee area to take care of some family emergencies. I had been living in UAE for about 6 years. I wanted to travel a bunch. And that's how I met, like, Andy, for example, at American University of Sharjah, great university. And I had to come back quickly, and you can't just get a professional job. So I should have known in advance, and so I was returned to the Chattanooga area, that transportation, trucking would be the most likely outcome. But for the first 14 months, I was determined, because I had a CFA charter, it's a leading practitioner designation for finance. I was determined, I'll just get a finance job. Things will be fine. Take care of family issues, live in Chattanooga, no worries. Well, it took me 12 months till I had my first interview. And that only came after I learned that data science was this new fancy thing. And it was supposedly the sexiest job in America. And I literally had filled out hundreds of applications and cover letters on the finance side, but I changed my resume to say data scientist based on the academic research in the past and the modeling. And I immediately had 2 interviews. One was a Freightway before they had their Series A, and also with Covenant Transport. And I started Covenant Transport about a month or so later. And so I decided at that point in time, I would never be unemployed again, or do whatever I could. And I'm going to learn trucking as much as possible. And so that started that process. And it's, I joke, it's not a joke. I say that if I'd known how interesting supply chain logistics was, I would have chosen to start there for the finance.
Well, that's great. Many times combining things that aren't typically combined generates innovation. And speaking of innovations, and don't be shy, tell us a little bit about some of your successes, a few of the things you've built.
Yeah, happy to. So when I started coming to transport, it was, I dove in, I fully immersed, and I guess I can admit this now, but I was contract work then, so I wasn't allowed to work more than 8 hours, but I made sure I would be the first one to make coffee every morning, and I'd leave 7 or 8 at night. And I had access to tons of data detail from all the carrier transactions and movements that Covenant had. But then I learned that they didn't actually, on a lane level, know what the profitability by lane was as it was run. And so I created what we call the profit analyzer, which allowed, effectively real time or after the load was done, because you still have to control for all the wait times and everything, what the profitability was by lane. Happy to say they used that for many years. I think they finally just stopped using it about a year or so ago. Then at FreightWaves, I was director of data science. So from raw data to variable, I created 106 of the top 250 variables just by myself. And if you throw in the junior data scientists I worked with, about 150 of the top 250. And just myself alone was responsible for 74% of the clicks on Sonar for about 2 years. So the benefit I had at Covenant was seeing all that raw data. So when I got to FreightWaves, I started that raw data again and created variables that made sense to explain trucking. Cloud Trucks, I created built a pricing system. I was the second data guy. I loved it because when I got there, they already had 10 engineers sending data, but they only had one data person. I was the second data guy. Produced all the pricing, profitability, heat map, and started some with their RFP push to switch to contracts. And I'll go to most recently at Triumph Financial. They wanted to build a rate product. I love it. We didn't quite agree on the sort of the data, but I built a rate for a product for them. And it was a wonderful learning experience. And then life happened. And I'll pause there before I step into Trokai, but that's some of the successes. And it's been a very fun ride.
So, Sam, what really motivated you to start Trokai specifically?
So during my time at Triumph, it was a wonderful time. A lot of great people there and everything. And I guess I'll comment every place I've worked, I've had the benefit of very nice people and experiences. But at Triumph, they want to build a rate product. They want to build it off the factoring document because that's a large portion of the revenue. And they knew there'd be synergies on extraction of that paperwork. And then they can match it to the audit data set. On the paperwork side, though, the issue is two main issues. One is that it comes after the load is delivered. So on the timeliness perspective, it's not ideal for a rate product. The other issue is that doing paper extraction, even though you can get total 95% extraction rates, 95% extraction rates is misleading in the sense that it doesn't mean you got 19 out of 20 rate cons or purchase orders correct. It means 19 out of 20 items. So if you got 3 rate cons, it might be you got 100% of one, 100% one, 85% of another. So it greatly restricted the data. But during that time of Triumph, I clearly saw and clearly understood that there were 2 big complaints people had about the rate products. One was the quality of the data, and the other related to the cost of it. And the cost of it really confused me in a sense. I mean, I knew the expense of it before, but I thought of it differently. And I came to think of it like oil and gas. If I'm sitting on a piece of property and have mineral rights and there's oil underneath that ground, I actually directly benefit from it. But in the case of rate products, that oil effectively gets sent to the refinery for nothing. And then the producer of that oil actually has to buy their data back when it's aggregated with someone else, with other pieces of data. So to me, that model didn't make sense. So unfortunately, Triumph canceled the rate product I was working on, let me go, and I was free to compete in whatever way I wanted to. So I decided this was the right path. So I spoke to some of my friends, and we decided to build the product.
You said this wasn't really a tech problem, but more of a data problem. What made that clear to you?
If you think of history throughout time with marketplaces, it's more about getting all the people in one spot. It doesn't necessarily need to be tech for that marketplace, that data exchange, or the product and monetary exchange to happen. But in the case of, let's take Convoy or any other attempt at building a marketplace, the tech's extremely savvy, extremely highly qualified. But even in the case with Convoy, they would talk about the siloed data when they built in the brokers, a brokers type system. So it's really a function of not ability to identify what the best rate is, it's ability to have an access to view it. So if you have more data in one place, it greatly benefits the process of calculating a rate, of doing a marketplace, or any other data providing, as opposed to some fancy AI that may try to fill parts in. Or said differently, I view it as great data with a good model always beats good data with a great model. Maybe sometime in the future, 20 years from now, that'll change. But until this case, every LLM depends on the data provider. That's still the case. It's going to be the case for a long time going forward. So again, the data is the driving force behind whatever rate product or marketplace or whatever data products you want.
So why is truckload data, high quality truckload data, so hard to get in one place?
That's a great question. And essentially, and it's not just truckload data, but in this case, it's specifically related to truckload data. And that the systems that are in place, that are the structures that are built are, again, data shared, and the customer then buys the data back in the aggregated form. But in that case, the creator of the data, in this case, I'm referring to brokerages for the most spot truckload market, they're not rewarded for the data they share. So there's very little incentive to make it timely or highly detailed. So because of that, you share what you have to share in order to participate in the current market that for zip by truckload rate. But if they say, well, we want better, we want best, whatever other detail, it's like, well, I get nothing out of this. I'm going to do the bare minimum. But in the case of the ownership model, if you realize that if brokers were rewarded for the data they created, then they're much more highly incentivized to share that better data. Now, why does this better data matter? It doesn't just create a better product, but it also creates great efficiency. So let's say you're a CPG carrier and you're moving freight around all over the place, and you don't have good information for contacting or setting the best rate or contacting the best provider to make the most efficient movement of that freight. Well, in that case, that costs you more money. Across the board, there's a huge deadweight loss that exists for shippers that brokers bear the cost of and carriers bear the cost of because of the inefficiency of data. So if you have better data sources, because the data provider is incentivized, which is why Trokai is going to be 80% owned by brokers that provide data, then the entire system works better and everyone across the board wins.
So what incentives were missing that kept data providers from fully participating?
So the main incentive is initially when truckload rate products started, there wasn't a requirement or an incentive. I believe the first national account for DAT with alum, for example. In that case, they just needed a rate product, and it wasn't a high requirement or anything to make us. You didn't need a great rate product at that time in order to have something that was substantially better than nothing. Since then, obviously, amount of data and detail and the handling of it, the uses of it that can take place due to, the great increases in computing power, et cetera, means that better data is much more valuable. And so based on initially how it's structured and brokers didn't have ownership of it, it didn't work out well for creating a better system with better data being supplied.
What tends to go wrong when third parties try to extract value from data that they didn't create?
I'm not saying you can't have a good rate product. Not to say you can't have good things with it, but if you look at certain data providers, their rate may be quoted 3 or 7 days old. Some of the rates may be filled in based on estimates from algorithms or models that do a pretty good job as long as the freight rates are consistent in the areas and the lanes in which they're comparing to. But it's a very imperfect system that just, unnecessarily it creates improper pricing and inefficiency. So if you are available, if the actual true data is available and the tech exists to put it together in a timely fashion, which is certainly the case these days, then there's other inefficiencies that exist that should be replaced. And the people that create the data should be the ones that are rewarded for it. And that substantial, important relationship, it means everything is moving forward more efficiently.
Yeah. At some point, you realized that Trokai resembled MasterCard's early structure. And if you wouldn't mind explain what you mean by that, but also how did that hit you or when did it hit you?
I realized it was MasterCard, only about, I'm going to say literally a month and a half ago, but I've been doing this for close to a year and a half. Now, initially, and I should say I'm reading Brad Jacobs now, his title, How to Make a Few $1 billion. It's a very interesting, catchy title, but there's a lot of good content there. One, he makes the comment about beating yourself up. I can say a month ago, when I was listening to some other podcasts and et cetera, and outside the weeds of trucking that I'm usually always buried in, I was listening to a podcast on Visa and it clicked. I'm like, wow, what we built is actually, I dug in more and MasterCard started in a slightly different structure, but what we're building is very, very similar to MasterCard. And I'm like, literally like, how could I not notice this? I mean, MasterCard's a financial transaction business. I'm a finance PhD. I spent, I don't know, much more time than I should have going, ridiculous. But then what I realized is that, I take this, it's really quite reassuring to say that independently of understanding how MasterCard was built, we build the same type system by saying, well, what are the proper incentives to have companies work together that are competing? What kind of governance structure is needed to say that we'll cooperate on this level and we'll compete on everything else. And we independently build that. And then we came to the conclusion afterwards, wow, this is like MasterCard. So that's reassuring. And I passed the annoyance of being myself over, but it's really quite a nice situation that MasterCard, they decided that they would have their infrastructure and standardize certain things so they could have scale and operability across the U.S. back in the day when banks were much more localized. Whereas Trokai is saying, hey, you guys have this joint data layer that you need to share. Come to terms with what you want to share and what parts of those data products you wish to have to produce products. The first one being a truckload rate, then make other choices after that. And then have great say in how the business is run. So if the banks started MasterCard, the brokers are starting Trokai, very similar systems. So even though they're different industries, it's the same outcome. And I credit it to economics win.
You've described that as convergent evolution. What does that mean in the business context?
So if I think of, sharks versus dolphins is the first example that comes to mind. And that's, they have very similar characteristics and shapes. Dolphins, of course, are mammals. Sharks, of course, fish. But they have very similar characteristics because of the environment they were in. And so we're in an economic system, both cases, MasterCard and herself at different time periods were starting, but still very similar economic systems, and that those shaped us to look quite similar. I would like to think that, since dolphins are smarter and they work together better than sharks, I prefer we'll call us the dolphin portion and say MasterCard are the sharks. But I do think that's just an example of how things under similar conditions come to the same point. So, it's fortunate that that's the case.
How do you decide where competitors should compete and where they should cooperate?
So, in this case, I'll do two parts. First, I'll make a academic joke and say that, you and I, I'm sure, love having super smart students in our classroom, but there are times that I couldn't answer the question. As an early professor, I used this. Later on, I didn't use it. If I had a question I was asked, I would say, well, I could answer that, but then it'd be testable. And then no one would answer. No one would comment on it. But instead, what I do is later look up and find the answer once I'm matured and then come back to the class with it. In this case, my easy answer is, well, brokers own 80% of the business. If brokers want a particular product, then by all means, they can develop and guide strategy, who competes where on what. My guiding point is that I need to have a very strong tech system. Our CTO was the one that led the software team that built FreightWave Sonar. We have a stack stood up. We have several engineers that we work with. So we have the right tech structure in place. Now we work on the governance structure in place. And that governance structure says, all right, let's very carefully delineate what data we're going to share, what that data looks like. And then the next step is what data is that data used for. And so the first step is a truckload rate product. Everybody already uses it. There's effectively zero market fit risk. And so the next step is we make sure we have the system in place. If they wish to build a marketplace, DAT and Triumph Exchange are both building marketplaces. And between them over the last year, they spent at least $500 million to build that. And they're doing that with inferior data. Brokers create and own the data. If they wish to have the same thing, my goal is to have the system in place so they can do that. If they decide on that data layer, that's not a product they wish to compete on, that's fine. There's other opportunities as well. But the brokers make the final answer. I think I have some right answers, but I'm not the know-it-all. I'll make suggestions and then they decide.
Why is it important that Trokai not disintermediate or compete with brokers?
We said so that brokers are 100% our partners. We want them on equal playing field. When I first started this and was pursuing VC money, VC said, okay, we love it, blah, blah. I had some great contacts. Some I still talk to today. But they said, we need to have different voting class shares. If you're going to give away so much of your ownership in exchange for data rights, then we don't feel comfortable, so quickly giving up our ability to manage the company and guide the company. And first I was like, okay, we can have dual class voting shares. Berkshire Hathaway has it. Others have it. MasterCard actually now has it as well, post IPO. as referred to the earlier times we were discussing. But I talked to a few brokers, and brokers said, hey, if you really want to be our partners, then just ask us for some capital. Make it reasonable, make it fair. We know that your goal is to convert our truckload data cost center to a profit center. And if you want to do that, though, don't chase the outside money. Just work with us. And by that process, that means that brokers own more, they have greater input, and I'm not doing anything that would change that position. I firmly believe long-term that the intermediaries that exist in the market, the brokers, that will continue to expand. I think the low barrier to entry to carriers is continue to be a larger portion of the for-hire market. And so we see brokers as the long-term winners, regardless, based on that situation. But if they can also control their data and create different and superior products, then it's a win-win. So it only makes sense for us to partner with them so that we all profit together. And to do that, we can't have anything in place that doesn't have us 100% aligned. Because the main thing is the data. It's not our tech. It's not what we propose or the profits we believe we can make for them. It's they're going to trust us. So we have a governance structure in place that means we're not going to intermediate them. We're not going to harm their business. And we show that they're the guiding force, and that's the right framework for this to exist.
If Trokai works as intended, what changes first for brokers, and what do you see as success 5 or 10 years from now?
Well, that's some great questions. So on this, I'll make my assumption that some of the things I'm supporting or promoting are accepted by brokers. Ultimately, it's going to be, again, their choice. They own 80% of the business. The first thing is we get a better rate product. The current situation with rate products is typically or almost always the details aren't shared. So if you have a truckload rate that is a multi-stop and a hazmat or liftgate or team or escort or something, that detail may not be in the quote. So you have the quote and you have the pickup and destination, but you don't have those other details. So it's very difficult to actually understand what the proper standardized price is for a particular load. So we'll give better pricing information. And because of the detail we get, and we get it at booking date, we can show the full distribution. And Jason Miller's talked about this at a couple of conferences where it's not just knowing the 25th and 70th percentile on the average, but if you can see the distribution, how the distribution shifts, you can have much better insight to how the market's changing more quickly. So better insight for that. I know AVRL wants to be, they're talked about being the McKinsey of pricing. Every good McKinsey or consultant can better perform their job if they have better tools. And so the better pricing detail and the better information as far as actual trucks in and out of market, lead time, the ability to drop loads that are picked up too quick. It's picked up, let's say, or set up, priced 12 hours before pickup. Those can be dropped out, but all the additional information, and if you're not in truckload, I apologize. But the summary is all the additional data detail we're able to provide because brokers are now willing to share it because they're rewarded for it, means a much better system in place.
Sam, this is really impressive. Now that I've heard the full story, I understand more clearly how your finance expertise and your logistics trucking expertise really came together in this, because I think you need that kind of level of expertise. And of course, having a PhD in finance and a CFA, you have all kinds of knowledge of finance that very few people in trucking do, very few. Even CFOs, a lot of times of trucking companies, they may have a lot of understanding of finance, but a lot of times they don't know as much of the information about for example, rate structures and how rates change and supply and demand. And but thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really interesting.
My pleasure. And if I'll make a quick plug in that we've had 2 conferences already where Jason Miller leads the conference and he gives us great insight to the markets, et cetera. And we're going to have another one probably in Chattanooga, then later in Chicago. So just follow me if you want, Sam Tens on LinkedIn, and you'll get more information. And I appreciate your time. It's been a pleasure.